He waited until the last photo was taken, then whispered he was leaving me. At our daughter's graduation, I smiled for the crowd. But what I did next, he never saw coming. I still remember the weight of that moment, how the world didn't stop spinning, even though mine did. The sun was warm on my face, the air filled with applause and flashbulbs, and somewhere in the background, our daughter was laughing with her friends, cap still tilted awkwardly on her head. And there he was, my husband of 19 years, smiling just enough for the cameras while slipping the knife in with a whisper no one else could hear. I'm leaving you. Tonight. My heart didn't break, not yet. It froze. I nodded, smiled for the next photo, held the bouquet higher, because I knew this moment wasn't mine to ruin. But what he didn't know, what he never imagined, is that I had just begun to write the final chapter of our story. And this time, I was the author. My name is Saren Lysell. I'm 43 years old, and up until 2 weeks ago, I thought I had spent the last 19 years building a life. A home. A family. What I didn't realize was that I had been building a stage, a perfectly curated set for someone else's performance. And when the curtain finally dropped, I wasn't the star. I was just the backdrop. I used to be a teacher, high school English, back when books still smelled like something sacred. I loved that job. Loved the way a good story could crack open a student's world, how a shy kid in the back row could come alive through the right poem. But when Damon made partner and Aurelia was just starting kindergarten, the long hours and unpredictable schedules became too much. Someone had to be the net, the steady one. So I resigned. I told myself it was temporary. Just a few years. That was 16 years ago. Now I run a small flower shop in our town's historic district. It's called Wildroot, and the name was meant to be poetic, life blooming from the ordinary. I started it as a side passion, a little something to give myself purpose beyond being a lawyer's wife and a PDA board member. And for a while it worked. For a while I felt like me. Damon Lysell, my husband, was always the driven one. Law school, internships, 12-hour days, charm like polished marble. People loved him. And when they saw us together, they loved the idea of us. We looked good. He was tall, well-spoken, crisp suit and sharper jawline. I was the quieter one, the warm one, the mother. We played our parts well. I memorized my lines. And then there was Aurelia, our daughter, my light, my reason. Born 2 months early with lungs that needed machines to breathe for her, but a scream loud enough to make the nurses wince. Fierce from the beginning. I remember sitting by her incubator every day, reading her Jane Austen out loud because I needed her to hear strength in a woman's voice. Even then, I knew she'd be something different. And she was. She graduated summa cum laude last Saturday. Double major in political science and environmental economics. She wants to work in policy reform, climate advocacy, grassroots campaigns. She's the best parts of both of us, distilled and polished. Damon calls her our legacy. I just call her mine. Graduation day was supposed to be perfect. I spent a week planning for it. I made sure her gown was steamed, her honors cords packed. I arranged the after-dinner reservations myself because Damon said he was too swamped at work to help. I even had a custom bouquet made, peonies, white lilac, and green ranunculus, her favorites. I tied it with silk ribbon in her school colors and tucked a note in the stems. Your roots are deep. Go bloom, baby. I should have known something was wrong that morning. Damon barely looked up from his phone. He took the suit I laid out, gave me a tight smile, and said, "You always think of everything." But his voice had that hollow note again. That distant politeness he'd started using sometime after New Year's. I'd noticed it more and more lately, like he was always bracing for a conversation he didn't want to have. I asked him once, a few months ago, if we were okay. We were lying in bed, not touching. I remember the silence that followed my question felt colder than a no. He said, "Of course we are," and rolled over. I chalked it up to stress. His caseload had been heavy, and Aurelia's final semester had been intense. Everyone was tired. Everyone had a reason to feel off. God, I wish I hadn't done that. We drove to the ceremony, mostly in silence. Aurelia had ridden with her roommate. Damon tapped at his phone the whole ride. I stared out the window, watching the familiar roads blur into concrete parking structures and ivy-covered buildings. The university campus was bustling with families, camera crews, and cap-and-gown flashes. There was laughter in the air.
Joy.
Future. Everything I thought we'd made it to together. Damon put his arm around me during the national anthem. That's the part that still turns my stomach. He leaned into me, forehead relaxed, looking every bit the proud father. And I leaned back. I let myself believe we were still us, just for a moment. I let myself believe that the girl walking across the stage in those stupid heels we begged her not to wear, that she was the product of love that hadn't expired. She saw us in the crowd and waved. I cheered louder than anyone. Damon clapped, polite and composed. His mouth moved like he was smiling, but his eyes never met mine. Afterward, we took photos near the fountain. I snapped shots of Aurelia with her friends, her professors, even a few classmates she swore she hated but smiled with anyway. And then, the three of us posed together. A final picture. My family.
Click.
That was when he leaned in. His breath tickled the shell of my ear, and I thought he was going to tell me how proud he was of her. How beautiful she looked. How grateful he was. I'm leaving you. Tonight. 12 syllables. That's all it took to detonate 19 years.
I didn't say anything.
I couldn't. I smiled for the next few photos. Smiled as if my ribcage hadn't just cracked open like a rotting beam. Smiled as if my hands weren't shaking beneath the silk ribbon tied around that bouquet. After the photos, he kissed Aurelia on the cheek and said he'd meet us at the restaurant. He walked away like it was any other evening, as if he hadn't just buried our marriage beneath a field of flashbulbs. I watched him leave. Something in me broke, but not in the way I expected. It wasn't grief, not even rage. It was clarity, cold and precise. He thought I would unravel quietly. He thought wrong. I've spent almost 2 decades learning how to make things bloom, how to coax life out of the neglected, the tired, the root-bound. I built a life on tending, and he mistook that for weakness. He never saw the steel beneath the softness. I remember the moment I realized just how far I'd bent myself around his ambition. It was 3 years ago. Damon had been invited to speak at a regional legal summit, and Aurelia had just started her internship in D.C. I had the house to myself for the first time in years. I made tea, picked a book off the shelf, and I sat there in silence, not knowing what to do with it. My whole identity had been in support of theirs. I didn't go on vacations. Damon said they were too expensive. I didn't go back to school for my counseling certification. Damon said the market was oversaturated. I didn't complain when he came home at 11 p.m. 4 nights a week, or when he forgot our anniversary 2 years in a row. I told myself it was love. But love doesn't shrink you. Aurelia once asked me if I regretted not becoming a writer. I told her no, that being her mother was the greatest story I'd ever written. But I think part of me lied. Because deep down I knew. I had silenced my own voice for so long, I no longer recognized its sound. And now, here, at the edge of everything I'd built, I felt it coming back. I felt it rising. We sat down to dinner that evening at Callahan's, a quiet bistro with linen tablecloths and tiny candles shaped like pine cones. Aurelia was buzzing with energy, retelling stories from her final semester, beaming in her sleeveless navy dress and honor cords. I nodded, laughed in all the right places, even toasted to her future. Damon joined us halfway through the meal.
Late.
No apology. He kissed her temple, then sat across from me with a look that could only be described as guilt buried under arrogance. I didn't say a word. That's the thing about betrayal. It teaches you silence in a way love never does. He looked nervous. Briefly, like he knew the aftershock hadn't hit yet. I smiled across the table and said, "You should be proud of her." He nodded. "She's your legacy, right?" I added. "Your greatest investment."
He didn't respond.
Because even he knew investments don't run off with secretaries behind your back. Later that night, after we dropped Aurelia off at her friend's graduation party and drove home in silence, Damon finally spoke. I'll sleep in the guest room tonight, he said. I looked at him, and I smiled again. The same smile I used at graduation. The same one I would use over the coming days as I slowly began to take everything back that he'd quietly stolen. My identity, my time, my future. Because I'd already made my decision. Let him sleep in the guest room. Let him think I was stunned into submission. He had no idea that while he was sipping wine and exchanging texts with someone half my age, I had already begun documenting every bank statement, every flight itinerary, every charge to our joint account that wasn't mine. Let him rest. He'd need the strength. Because this wasn't the end of our story. It was only the first chapter of mine. I didn't confront Damon that night. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. Instead, I waited until the door to the guest room clicked shut and then walked into our walk-in closet with a notebook and my old laptop. Not the sleek new one Damon gave me 2 Christmases ago. The one I now realized was probably compensation. No, this was the one I kept from my teaching days, the one with the cracked corner and stickers of Aurelia's doodles from when she was 7. And I began to write. Not a story. Not yet. A list. Every time I'd second-guess myself. Every trip he'd taken that I wasn't invited to. Every business dinner that went suspiciously late. Every time he'd used the word overreacting when I brought up his distance. By 2 a.m., I had 3 full pages. By 3 a.m., I remembered the name Karina. He'd mentioned her twice, offhand, at different times, always in passing. Once when talking about hiring a new paralegal. Once when saying his assistant double-booked his calendar. The tone was wrong both times. A little too casual. Too clean. At 3:40 a.m., I found her Instagram. Private account. Bio. Legal assistant. Wine snob. Brunch enthusiast. One profile picture, her holding a wine glass in front of a city skyline. Tagged photos told the real story. In one, she stood next to a table at a rooftop bar, Damon in the background, blurred but unmistakable. Another showed a champagne bottle chilling in a hotel room. Same brand he liked. Same rare label we used to save for anniversaries. And then there it was, tagged by a friend. Weekend in Napa with C2 Hearts #Deservate #LawGirlsJetaway. Posted 6 weeks ago. Damon was supposed to be in Boston that weekend for a client deposition. My stomach clenched. This wasn't a crisis anymore. This was premeditated erasure. He'd been slowly editing me out of his life, and thought I'd never notice. The next morning, I dressed carefully. Not to impress. Not to provoke. I just wanted to feel like someone real, someone grounded. Jeans, linen blouse, a little lipstick. The scent of bergamot I always wore when I needed strength. The scent he once called home. He was already in the kitchen when I came down, reading the paper like nothing had happened. You sleep okay? He asked. I nodded. You? He looked up. Enough. It was like watching a stranger wear my husband's skin. I'll need a few weeks to sort things out, he said. Housing, finances. We'll talk. I nodded again. He sipped his coffee. I'll keep things amicable, Saren. Amicable. The word landed like a blade. He thought this would be clean. Efficient. He thought I was still the quiet woman who folded his socks and kept the books for the flower shop and left the negotiations to him. He hadn't done his homework. By Wednesday, I had met with my own attorney. Her name was Leora Maddox, recommended by a vendor friend, and known for her work representing small business owners in contentious divorces. She read through Damon's online profiles, clicked through a few legal documents, and looked up at me. He's been preparing for this for a while, she said. Did you know he transferred joint assets into a separate account last year under the name Lysell Holdings? I stared at her. No. She turned the screen toward me. And he listed himself as the sole member of your shop's LLC on one renewal form from 6 months ago.
Did you sign that?
I blinked. He handles our licensing paperwork. I stopped.
Of course he did.
Of course he made sure he had controlling interest in everything I'd built under the guise of helping. Leora leaned back. Do you want this quiet? Or do you want this right? I clenched my jaw. I want it right. And I want him to feel it. Thursday morning, I walked into Wildroot like a woman on a mission. I hadn't told my staff anything.
Not yet.
But they felt it. There's something about heartbreak that lingers in the air. It settles in your voice, your posture, the way your hands tremble when tying ribbon around a bouquet. Ray, my assistant manager, pulled me aside after lunch. "Is everything okay?" she asked, soft and cautious. I wanted to lie, but then I thought, why protect him? "No," I said, "but it will be." She didn't press, just nodded and hugged me. The kind that's meant to hold your spine together when it's threatening to shatter. By Friday, I had rerouted all business financials through a newly restructured entity. One Leora helped me file. Saren Wildroot LLC. All new deposits. All incoming invoices. All vendor contracts under my name. If Damon tried to touch it, he'd find nothing familiar. That weekend, Aurelia came home unexpectedly. She walked through the front door in leggings and an oversized sweater, hair still curled from the night before, holding a bouquet from her university's garden. I hadn't seen her in 5 days. She sat down across from me at the kitchen table, dropped her phone into her lap, and said, "Dad told me." My breath caught. "Told you what, exactly?" Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. "That he's moving out. That you're splitting." I looked at her, trying to find the right version of the truth. "He told you why?" She shook her head. "He said people change. That it's been coming for a while. That you'd understand." The laugh that escaped me was jagged. "Did he mention Karina?" Aurelia blinked. "Who?" So I told her. I didn't give her all the sordid details. Just enough to break the illusion. She sat very still, then whispered, "I can't believe him." I reached across the table and took her hand. "You don't have to choose sides." She squeezed mine. I already did. Monday morning, Damon called to check in. His voice was smoother than usual. He must have thought enough time had passed for civility. "Just making sure things aren't too tense," he said. "I'd like us to handle this with maturity." I almost laughed. He meant discretion. He meant quiet compliance. "I agree," I said. "In fact, I've taken care of the shop paperwork. All financials have been restructured, so there's no confusion going forward." There was a pause. "You what?" "I've separated everything. It's all mine now, fully and legally." He tried to recover. "That's unnecessary. We can review those things during the settlement." "I'm not negotiating my identity, Damon." Silence. Then he scoffed just barely. "You're making this harder than it has to be." That was the moment I snapped. "No," I said quietly. "You made this harder. When you treated me like a footnote in your own story. When you built a second life without the decency to end the first. I'm not angry you fell out of love, Damon. I'm furious you did it so small." I hung up. My hand was shaking, but I felt taller. That night, I took a walk around the lake near our house. The air smelled like rain-soaked earth and pine. The kind of smell that reminds you you're still here, still breathing. And I thought about the versions of myself I had lost. The teacher, the writer, the woman who used to love thunderstorms and Sunday mornings, and the rush of reading something aloud to a room full of students. I wasn't broken. I was becoming. By the end of that week, Damon's attorney reached out. He wanted mediation. Neutral ground. He was trying to slow the fallout. But it was too late. The damage was already done. And I wasn't interested in being neutral. I was interested in being whole. I still hadn't told Aurelia everything. She was processing in her own way. But one night, as we sat in the living room watching some mindless movie, she leaned her head on my shoulder and said, "You're different. Stronger." "I think I'm just done apologizing." She smiled. "It looks good on you." The final blow came in a manila envelope. 1 week after that phone call, I sent Damon a formal audit. Every withdrawal from our joint accounts over the past 18 months, categorized by date and vendor. Every wine bar, hotel, airline. I enclosed it with a note. "For someone who believes in documentation, you left quite a trail. I won't drag your name, Damon. But I won't shield it either. Make this divorce clean, or I go public." He didn't respond, but I heard from his lawyer the next day. Full concession. Clean split. No contest. He knew I wasn't bluffing. And me? I stood outside Wildroot the next morning and watched the early sunlight pour across the sidewalk like gold ribbon. I thought of everything I had lost and everything I was about to build. Aurelia stopped by after lunch, holding 2 coffees and a folder. "What's this?"
I asked. She grinned.
"My application for that fellowship in New York. I'm going." I nodded, eyes brimming. "You're going to change the world." She hugged me tight. "So are you, Mom. Just in your own way." Escalation wasn't destruction. It was awakening. He thought he could walk away from our marriage like it was a failed investment. But I wasn't a number in his portfolio. I was the story he never thought I'd finish. And this time I held the pen. The first time I saw Damon again in person was 2 weeks after our last call. He showed up at the flower shop. I was in the back, helping Ray unload a new shipment of gardenias, when the bell above the front door rang. The energy shifted. Ray glanced at me, then stepped aside. "He's here," she whispered. I wiped my hands on a cloth and walked out, spine straight, expression unreadable. Damon stood by the front counter in a navy blazer, casual but rehearsed, like he thought looking approachable would change the outcome. I crossed my arms. "What do you want?" He hesitated. "I just wanted to talk. Privately." I gestured toward the tiny break room in the back, past the fridge filled with bouquets. 5 minutes. We sat across from each other at the little table I usually used for vendor receipts and lunch breaks. He started with a sigh, the kind men use when they're pretending to carry a heavier burden than they actually do. "I didn't expect things to turn out this way, Saren." I tilted my head. "Didn't you?" He looked surprised. "You're different. I'm free. There's a difference." Silence. Then he cleared his throat. "Look, I know I made mistakes, but I'm not the villain you're painting me to be." My hands were still. My voice, calmer than I expected. "You left me at our daughter's graduation, Damon. Not before. Not after.
During.
You waited until the applause died and the cameras clicked and the speeches ended, and then you whispered that you were done. Like I was a chapter in your life you forgot to erase." He looked down, as if embarrassed. But his next words betrayed him. "I thought it would be easier that way." That was when I realized the depth of his arrogance. Not only had he believed I'd take it quietly, he'd planned for my silence. Counted on it, like a detail in a settlement document he'd drafted in his mind. I leaned in. "You miscalculated. I gave you 19 years. Built a life beside you. Put my own dreams on pause to support yours. And you thanked me by erasing me. That's not fair." "No, what's not fair is the way you tried to keep the shop under your name. What's not fair is the way you groomed a younger woman and called it evolution. What's not fair, Damon, is thinking you could manage me like a client or a case." He tried again. "I never wanted a war. But you started one." I stood. And then I dropped the real bomb. "I know about the offshore account." His jaw tensed. "What are you talking about?" "Please don't insult me," I said calmly. Leora traced it. "Under Lysell Consulting. You funneled over $120,000 out of our joint accounts over 18 months and buried it in a contingency reserve in the Cayman Islands. The digital paper trail's already been submitted to the court." He went pale. "You didn't. You wouldn't." I smiled thinly. "You always underestimated me." The fallout wasn't swift, but it was thorough. My lawyer filed an emergency motion to freeze all disputed assets until the divorce settlement could be finalized. Damon's firm, once the gleaming ivory tower he stood in, received an anonymous packet of documentation detailing his financial manipulations. I didn't send it. I didn't have to. Whistleblowers have a funny way of finding moral high ground when they smell blood. I stayed quiet.
Poised.
But then the universe handed me something I didn't expect. An invitation. From Aurelia. She was being honored at her university's Dean's Gala, a prestigious evening recognizing top graduates, influential alumni, and family contributors. She was allowed 2 guests.
And she chose me.
The night of the gala, I wore midnight blue. Not black. Not mourning. a color that whispered elegance and screamed survival. I walked into that ballroom beside my daughter, like I'd never been anyone's afterthought. My hair curled into soft waves, a silver cuff bracelet around my wrist, and confidence in every step. Damon was there. Of course he was. Still clinging to social image, his suit sharp, his smile just a little too wide. He didn't expect me. He didn't expect to see me seated on stage beside Aurelia when she received her leadership award. He didn't expect her speech to begin with. Everything I've accomplished is because of one woman, my mother, the strongest person I know. I felt his gaze burning from the second row, but I didn't look his way. Because in that moment, I understood something that had taken me nearly 2 decades to learn. My value was never in who I supported. It was in what I survived. After the gala, he approached us near the elevators. "Can I talk to you?" he asked me. Alone. Aurelia glanced at me, concerned. I nodded. "It's okay." She stepped back. He took a breath. "You humiliated me tonight." I raised an eyebrow. That was never the goal. But if the shoe fits. His jaw clenched. "You're not the woman I married." "I should hope not. That woman let you take up all the air in the room." He leaned in slightly, voice lower. "Karina left." I said nothing. She thought I'd lied to her. That I was using her to escape a midlife crisis. "And were you?"
He paused.
"I don't know." I smiled. "Now you do." He straightened, searching my eyes for something. Regret? Nostalgia? A lifeline? But all he saw was peace. And it terrified him. "You'll be alone," he said finally, almost like a curse.
"No," I said.
"I'll be whole. You're the one who walked away from love, Damon. Not me." He stepped back, defeated. And this time, I turned my back on him. 2 months later, the divorce was finalized. I kept the house, the shop, the garden I built with my bare hands. He walked away with less than he expected, and even less respect. People talk, especially in a town like ours. And while I never slandered his name, I didn't shield it either. His firm passed him over for partner. His social circle shrank. And I expanded. I reopened the flower shop under a new name, Lysel and Wildroot. Not as a symbol of him, but as a reclamation. A rewriting. Our name didn't belong to him alone. It was Aurelia's too. And mine. And it would now stand for something beautiful. One afternoon, a customer came in, a woman around my age. Quiet.
Worn.
Holding a tear-stained note in her hand. "My husband left last week," she said, eyes downcast. "I just wanted to buy something alive." I nodded, walked around the counter, and led her to the peonies. "They bloom even after being cut down," I told her. "A little care, a little light, and they open like they're not afraid of the world." She smiled, eyes softening. I handed her the bouquet. And for the first time in years, I felt like everything I'd endured had meaning. Because strength isn't loud. Sometimes, it's quiet enough to grow things. Aurelia sends me weekly voice messages from New York. She's thriving. Living in a tiny apartment, working at a nonprofit, surviving on coffee and courage. And in every word she speaks, I hear traces of myself. The parts one thought I'd lost. The parts that bloomed anyway. And sometimes, late at night, I reread the letter I wrote to myself the week after the graduation. The one I never sent. It ends with this. "He left me at our daughter's graduation." But that wasn't the ending. That was the spark. And the fire I became? He never saw it coming. Looking back, it's strange how the moments that break us often become the moments that define us. When Damon whispered those words at Aurelia's graduation, the words that should have shattered me completely, I felt something shift inside instead. I realized, painfully and slowly, that his leaving wasn't the end of my story. It was the moment I began writing my own. For years, I had lost myself in roles. The devoted wife, the selfless mother, the silent supporter of a man's ambitions. I thought love meant sacrifice, meant fading into the background so others could shine. I believed that if I just held on, endured the silence and the cold shoulders, things would eventually get better. but they didn't. And sometimes love doesn't save us. Sometimes we have to save ourselves. What surprised me the most wasn't Damon's betrayal, but how much power I still held. I realized that strength isn't always loud or dramatic. It can be quiet. It can be the resilience to bloom again, even after the hardest winters. Running my flower shop became more than a job. It was a symbol of that rebirth, a daily reminder that beauty can grow from pain, that life continues no matter what we lose. Aurelia's success, her grace through everything, was my ultimate vindication. She didn't just inherit her father's legacy, she inherited mine. The lessons of persistence, dignity, and courage I struggled so hard to pass on became her armor and her wings. Watching her flourish, knowing I helped raise her to be that woman, was the most profound revenge I could have ever imagined. I won't lie and say it was easy. Healing is messy. It requires confronting shame, letting go of anger, and accepting that some people won't come back the way you hoped. Damon's departure forced me to face truths I had buried for years, about my marriage, about myself, and about what I deserved. But it also freed me to choose who I wanted to be next. I share this story not just because it's mine, but because I know so many of you have lived it too. That crushing moment when someone you loved turns their back on you, when your world feels like it's falling apart in front of everyone else's eyes. If you're there now, I want you to hear this. Your worth is not defined by anyone else's choices. You can survive this. You can grow stronger than you ever imagined. And your story isn't over yet. So here's my question for you, the person listening now. If someone walked away from your life today, what would you do next? Would you crumble? Would you fight? Would you bloom quietly, fiercely, in your own time? I hope you choose to bloom. Because sometimes the greatest strength we have is simply the courage to keep growing, even when it feels like the whole world is watching us fall.